Just before noon, Paris time, 2 gunmen. At this time, we think it could be 3, based on the newest reports from the French Interior Minister, entered a French satirical weekly newspaper, opened fire, killing at least 12 people. And in terms of who they killed at this point, we now believe it to be an editor as well as 2 prominent cartoonists. We want to bring in Bill Plante right now, who is standing outside the White House, who can give us some sense of how the White House is responding to all of this. Of course, we heard from the president earlier in the day. He's condemning in the strongest terms this attack. But what exactly is going on behind the scenes between the French president and President Barack Obama?
Well, Vanita, I'm sure that at some point President Obama will call President Hollande. We have not been informed of that yet, but it is sure to come. This attack is the worst fear of heads of state all over the West, certainly in this country, because it probably involves a lone wolf operation, people deciding to take revenge into their own hands. And this is something that the U.S. and the Department of Homeland Security have been on the lookout for, worried about forever. So this is something that resonates very deeply here. And when the White House puts out a statement from the president condemning this, of course they condemn it, but he also reaches down to say France has been one of our oldest allies, and they support these same universal values that we do. So it is something that you can expect to hear more about when the president undoubtedly will talk to Hollande later today.
I wonder, Bill, how much concern is there that the fight against ISIS, obviously we are still waiting to see a claim of responsibility here in this situation in Paris, but this is not the first time there has been, an attack here in recent months. We saw Sydney, we saw Ottawa, all within the last few months. How much concern is there that perhaps things like the fight against ISIS, the U.S. activity in Iraq and Afghanistan, all these things have become rallying cries and perhaps are something that make international partners think twice about getting on board any kind of U.S.-led effort to fight radical extremists?
Well, and for most of the European nations, particularly France, they have large Muslim populations, and it is a real concern. They can't afford not to be in the fight against ISIS. And as I said, this is the same kind of thing that is feared in every Western government, certainly here in the U.S.
You know, this newspaper is certainly not without controversy in the past. I was just reading in terms of the timeline of events. They were firebombed in November 2011, a day after it carried a caricature of the Prophet Muhammad. You mentioned that, the reality is this is everybody's worst fear. There's really no way to prep for it. But how in touch is our government with other governments about the possibility? In other words, how do they share resources in terms of how you approach intel and how you should be identifying these lone wolves in terms of the networks that they may be operating within?
Well, there's a constant trading of information. We know that between the Department of Homeland Security, the CIA, and other U.S. government agencies with Western European intelligence, particularly also in the Middle East. They try to correlate their knowledge of these people who operate possibly as groups, but more likely as individuals. And that's the trouble. It's so hard to get information on the people who act individually, these lone wolf perpetrators.
All right, Bill Plante at the White House, thank you for that.